everybody. Welcome to today's CTPSR webinar. It's with great pleasure that we have Andrew Rigby today talking about his latest book, Sowing the Seeds of the Future, explaining the power of constructive nonviolent action. Andrew is going to be talking about this book in conversation with Marwan Darweish. Just before we start, I would just like to announce that the next event that we'll be hosting will be on the 27th of April. Dr. Jess Gifkins from the University of Manchester will be speaking on queering R2P. And so we hope that as many people as possible can join that on the 27th. Right now, I'll hand over to Marwan to introduce Andrew and to chair the session. Thanks, Marwan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen. My name is Marwan Darweish. I work here at the Center for Trust, Peace and Social Relations as an associate professor, and I will be facilitating, chairing this seminar. So first, I would like to welcome you all. We have participants from all over the world today. We have already 40 participants. I want to say a word about the format of the webinar. It is slightly different from the usual seminars that we have. What I will do, I have few questions that I will ask Andrew about the book. I hope that up to 25 minutes, and then we are going to open for you the opportunity to ask. So welcome everybody. Let me first introduce Andrew and then move into the session. So thank you, Andrew, for agreeing to have this seminar and discussion. I'm really delighted that you're here, and we have had the opportunity to unpack some of the issues with this book. So Andrew, before Andrew joined Coventry University, he worked at the Department of Peace Studies in Bradford. He was a lecturer there for several years. So, and in 1999, he been recruited by Coventry to set up the Center for Peace and Reconciliation Studies, which over the years evolved to become today the Center for Trust, Peace and Social Relations. Andrew now is an emeritus professor, but he is still active researcher and publishing. He published a number of books and many articles on the themes of nonviolence, reconciliation, popular protest, and unarmed resistance. We jointly published a book about popular protest in Palestine in 2015. He is also part of Rethinking Security Project, which is a group of people that are trying to influence public opinion and policy to rethink the traditional way we look at security and provide alternative models. The project is also based at the center here. So with this introduction, I will move into, I would say, the conversation, really, questions and conversation with Andrew about the book. So a little bit of advertising. So this is the book. And if you would like to buy it, Stephen put the email, so do write to Andrew if you would like to buy a copy. So, Andrew, I read the book, but given that not everybody read the book, and today, people who are here, 42 people, can you tell us when is the sort of first seed were planted for this book? How did it started? And how did that start? And can you give us sort of a brief summary of what is the book about? And I would suggest we'll have, like 4 minutes or 5 minutes, and then you will excuse me if I stop you to move to the next question, if you go over that.
You're excused.
Yes, thank you.
When I was working here in Coventry, I was writing about peace building, reconciliation, forgiveness. But my long-term interest, and that, you know, and that's a kind of form of nonviolent change.
Okay.
I always remember somebody saying to me, forgiveness is a very powerful form of nonviolent transformation. And but once I retired, I was, you know, I still read and write. And I found that I was turning more and more to studying nonviolent action movements, social movements, including Palestinian movement.
Yeah.
And but also what started the book off was this fascination. Look, I'm what I would call a timid anarcho-pacifist. Yeah, I have these beliefs, but I'm a bit timid. And so there seemed to be, amongst a lot of the people that I know and respect, a growing interest in resistance studies, and which was very much focused on kind of contentious action, contentious nonviolent confrontation. And I'm not built for that. I don't want to go to jail. So, and I all the time, for many, many decades, I've been thinking about how you can bring about change in the interstices of your everyday life. And that's been my interest. That's personal and professional. And so that's what started me off of this book. And I didn't know how it would evolve, actually. But that, in essence, it's a kind of exploration of how change can be brought about by people acting according to their beliefs and trying to somehow embody in the here and now the kinds of values that they want to see adopted on a much wider scale in the future. I could go on, and you know, I can't. As I started writing, you know, people would say, "Oh, well, you need to look at this, and you need to look at this." You know, my friend Jürgen in Sweden, he said, "Well, what about constructive action in wartime?" And I'd never thought of it. It became the chapter that I found most fascinating for me in many ways. So that's it. And I found then as I started to think more deeply, I think what's running through the book is an exploration of the relationship between contentious forms of protest. Yeah. I think I use the word friction, that causes friction for regimes, for authorities, and so on, and the more quietistic forms of what I would call constructive action to bring about change in the here and now. Yeah.
Okay, I'll come back to that, but I wanted to also ask about, because reading the book, it is a different sort of style of writing, isn't it, from what you usually do. The book, it's like I would say it's like a long letter. It's where you weave in stories and reflection to explore constructive resistance. So how this sort of shift happened, or this change happened? I mean, knowing you as a friend, you are not the type of person that want to disclose and talk about emotions and want to be in the sort of center. So
yeah,
how did that happen?
I think it happened out of fear. I decided I was going to write this book. And to be honest, I thought, if I don't write it, somebody else is going to write it, and I can do it better than them. Or I want to do it my style. But as you're right, most of the books I've written have been commentaries on other people, based on interviews, scholarship, research, primary, you know, and so on and so forth. in which, you know, the personal values are there all the time, and that chooses the topic and so on and so forth, and it gains you access. But I'd never done this, you know, I didn't have a book to copy to draw, and I found it difficult to start writing. I was frightened, and then I used to tell my students, if you have what you think of as a writing block, pretend you're writing a letter to your mum or to your best friend or whatever. And I kind of, so that I thought, oh, I'll try that. And it seemed to work. And so then I just thought, this is kind of, it also aesthetically pleasing. And I think a critique, someone could come to the book and say, well, you haven't talked about this and you haven't talked about that. So by using my own biography, I can answer that question. I say, these are all movements and topics and so on that have touched my life in some way or other, you know, and so I kind of contextualized it in terms of, at this stage in my life, I came across.
Yeah.
And most people say that's the most interesting part of the book.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the challenge there was not to become self-indulgent. So that's it. And I think also just leaving, no longer being part of the university structure, working on my own. And sent, you know, I shared the draft chapter. I didn't share much of the book till it was finished.
Yeah.
But I shared it with a guy, Brian Martin down in Australia. And he was very encouraging. And that gave me the confidence. Because I don't know about other people, but it takes a lot of confidence to write a big book.
Yeah.
You know, so Brian gave me that confidence. So but I suspect he was being kind, but anyway.
And if he is hearing, so thank you, Brian. Yeah, I have a couple of questions about constructive resistance, but you know, now I'm going to change the order of my questions, because first of all, what is the difference? Because you talk about constructive action and constructive resistance. Sort of, what is the difference that you point out in your, and why you made this distinction? Sort of, or maybe can you give us an example? And then I have another question about constructive resistance in a different setting.
I can give you an example. I mean, so perhaps the best example, which I think I use in the book, is here in Coventry, there is a migrant women's centre. A house was obtained, and women who are seeking asylum, refugee status, asylum seekers, you know, they live there. That's a form of constructive action. You know, it's creating a home for people who would not otherwise have a home, and it's welcoming people, you know, and a kind of compassion and care and so on. But it's not, maybe at a certain level, it's kind of challenging this government's attitude towards visas and refugee status and so on. But essentially, it's not. It's humanitarian kind of initiative, and so nobody's got to get outraged. It's not causing any friction. It's not. It's not targeting anything, you know. Now, if in your country or one of your countries, Israel, you know, if you set up a center for Palestinian women in a Jewish neighborhood, that would be contentious, and it would be a form of resistance, because it would actually be challenging, you know, housing by ethnicity.
Yes.
So that would be the distinction. The reason I want to use the word action, because I wanted to resist the word resistance.
Okay.
At times. Whereas other people I know want to use the word resistance so that it can become more encompassing of forms of action other than being out in a demonstration or a protest. But you asked for an illustration, and that's the best illustration I could give. Okay, so resistance depends on the context. You know, if it causes friction, if there's an element of contestation. Then,
well, that's my next question. Really, is moving to where there is an opposition, there is a contestation, and in the context of a dictatorship, occupation, repression regimes, and when here it's clear that there is asymmetry of power between the dictatorship, the oppressor, the occupier, and the individual or the groups who are trying to resist that. So with this asymmetry, how, and I'm back to constructive resistance, how acts of constructive resistance can be, is it useful? Is it effective in this context? How can we include more people into this reality if people like yourself or others who are reluctant or worried into be part of it? So is this a sort of the weakness of constructive resistance? I'm putting the question.
Yeah, look, at times when I was writing it, I felt as if I was trying to sell constructive resistance.
Yeah.
And although it's written personally, I have sort of everything has to be source referenced and all the rest, and be aware of the limitations. The problem with constructive resistance as a mode of change in a repressive regime is, okay, most theories of changing repressive regimes by nonviolent means involves ideas about weakening the foundations of the regime, the pillars that support it. Now, how does that happen? Well, very often it involves defection of police or security, what have you, the loss of legitimacy and so on and so forth. The creation of situations that attract attention, they become media issues for nationally and around the world. So, here is a situation about which something must be done, and it can snowball into a genuine challenge. Constructive resistance doesn't work like that. It's not an event, it's a process. It's like, it's a life. What really one of the things that impacted me, as I wrote, research found out, because I didn't know what I was going to find out, but I started reading and researching about the change of regimes in the former Warsaw Pact countries in 1989. And I'd always read, Václav Havel, Power of the Powerless, living within the truth, living within the lie, powerful stuff. And what I realized, about Poland, Czechoslovakia, and to some extent in Serbia, is, okay, you engage in protest activities, the state reacts, you pay the price, the sanctions. People withdraw. What they were doing then was creating cultural centers. They were creating spaces, parallel institutions or whatever. Those little spaces, however temporary, within which they could live within the truth, rather than according to what the regime demanded. So these were little spheres of relative autonomy. Now, when the balance of power and so on and so forth came, that the regimes themselves start to be challenged, what you find is the people who were the most active in terms of organizing the protest demonstrations, etc., were these people who had been kept, if you want, their commitment had been sustained over the years through this low-key, quietistic,
quote-to-quote resistance or resilient or staying there.
So, and that I found is a kind of fascinating relationship, and something that I found really heartening for someone like me who doesn't want to get their head split open.
Yeah. Okay, I have another question probably, and I'll stop here to move to more, questions and from the the different people in the online, it is something that, I mean, you just mentioned the chapter about wartime and constructive resistance in wartime. I mean, given that we are, you know, in a wartime in several, not just in Ukraine, in Yemen, in Ethiopia, which sadly we don't hear much about, or in Yemen, which we don't hear much about, and obviously, and Afghanistan. What do you, I mean, what lessons, what action we can learn or draw which is relevant to the current situation? I mean, is there anything can be done in that?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask that question.
Sorry.
You know, when the bombs are coming down, the only thing to do is get in a base, get in a shelter, I think. There are ways to resist. In this kind of context, I tend to use the word unarmed rather than non-violently. There are ways to resist. There are ways to deny the legitimacy of an imposed regime. It depends. You know, if you're in the middle of a battlefield, there's nothing you can do. Unless you can be humanitarian, you know, in terms of heal the wounds or help people, you know.
Or you can probably not participate.
Well, or, you know, you
resist,
run like hell. But if it's an occupation, that's different. But if it's in the heat, in the war, I think what happened, what's fascinated me, because I was born in kind of the last year of the Second World War. So I always had this thing of what I would have done in the Second World War. And pacifists and non-violent activists in Britain, they set up cooperative communities, islands of democracy in a sea of barbarism, you know, to preserve certain kinds of values for the future. Now, that was in the UK. Elsewhere, then, of course, they engaged in other kinds of activities, humanitarian shielding of potential victims, helping people escape, providing needs. In countries like Norway and others, you know, teachers, ministers of religion, lawyers, they stood up for their professional values and did collaborate. The most impressive case in terms of the Second World War is actually Poland, where the decision was made, we might have lost the battle, but the struggle goes on.
Yeah.
And they ran underground education for like 5 years. And I read a quote which somebody said, this education system, you know, at the end of the war, said it's been the most amazing achievement. It saved us 5 generations of engineers, architects, teachers who were there, you know, so it's so impressive. So there are ways. What fascinates me there, and I've not really explored it, is the source of the kind of, if we can call it civic courage, that enables people to do that kind of, to do what they know they ought to do. So.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'll stop here with my questions, and then I will move to maybe more questions, comments, reflections from the participants.